The Watcher in the Dark, Part 1. Subtle Shifts. The house was quiet when Emily closed the front door behind her, the kind of quiet that feels almost staged, as if the walls were holding their breath. She had only lived here for 6 months, long enough to get comfortable, long enough for her shoes to scuff the hardwood in familiar places, for her favorite blanket to leave a permanent dent in the couch cushion, but not long enough for the silence to stop feeling heavy. Emily worked long hours as a nurse. Some nights she dragged herself home past midnight, her scrub smelling faintly of antiseptic, her head ringing with monitors and half-finished conversations. Other times she was home before sundown, curling up with tea and an old paperback, letting the house settle around her. She liked her house, or at least she wanted to. It was a 2-bedroom place on a quiet street, just far enough from the city that the nights were dark. The kind of dark where the stars cut sharp and cold across the sky. The price had been right, the neighborhood safe enough, though her realtor had warned her with a shrug. Single women always ask about safety. Emily had laughed then, trying not to feel the little pinch of loneliness in her stomach. But lately she had started to notice things. The first time it was her coffee mug. She had left it on the kitchen counter before work. She was sure of it, the handle turned toward the sink the way she always left it. But when she came home, it was sitting on the table near the window. She stared at it for a long moment, then let out a little laugh. Maybe she'd carried it there while scrolling through her phone. Maybe she'd forgotten. Nurses ran on caffeine and exhaustion. Misplaced mugs were hardly alarming. The second time it was her bedroom lamp. She never used it. The overhead light was brighter. But one evening she walked in and the lamp was switched on, humming faintly. She frowned, then switched it off. Maybe she'd bumped it while dusting. Maybe it had a loose connection. But the third time was harder to laugh away. Emily had a small jar of peanut butter she kept for late-night cravings. She remembered screwing the lid on tightly, setting it back in the cabinet. But when she reached for it a week later, the lid was sitting loose, barely balanced on top. Worse, there was a faint streak of peanut butter smudged across the counter, as if someone had carelessly dragged a knife and never cleaned up. Her stomach dropped as she stood there staring. She lived alone. For a few minutes she just stood in the kitchen, her breath shallow, listening. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. The house made its soft, familiar creaks, as if stretching in its bones. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Emily cleaned the smear with a paper towel, twisted the lid back on until her hand ached, and told herself she was imagining things. Still, when she went to bed that night, she locked her bedroom door for the first time. The nights felt different after that. When Emily came home from work, she found herself scanning the rooms with her eyes before setting her bag down, almost like she was making sure everything was still where she had left it. A throw pillow angled differently, a picture frame tilted, the curtain drawn just a little farther to the left. She told herself it was nothing. Houses shift, people forget. But the quiet started to bother her. Once, while brushing her teeth, she could have sworn she heard a soft creak in the hallway, the kind that comes when someone shifts their weight on old wood. She froze. Foam clinging to her lips, toothbrush paused mid-air. The sound didn't come again. She rinsed, spat, and told herself the house was settling. But that night she dreamed of footsteps just outside her bedroom door, slow and deliberate, moving back and forth. It got worse. One Saturday morning, Emily woke to find the living room window cracked open 2 inches. She never left her windows open. It was March, still cold enough that the nights bit at her skin if she forgot her blanket. She stood there in her pajamas, staring at the gap, her heart beating hard in her throat. The lock was twisted open. Her first thought was someone broke in. But nothing was missing. The TV was still there. Her laptop sat on the coffee table untouched. Her purse still hung from its hook. No glass was broken. Her second thought was worse. Maybe someone didn't leave. She backed into the hallway, hands shaking, and grabbed the nearest thing she could find, her heavy flashlight. She checked every room, the kitchen, the bathroom, both bedrooms, the closets, even under the bed. Nothing. By the time she finished, she was trembling so badly she had to sit down. She called her friend Kara, trying to sound casual, asking if she'd been by recently. Kara laughed, told her she was imagining things. "You work too much, Em. Stress makes you forget stuff. You probably cracked the window yourself and forgot." Emily forced a laugh in return, but when she hung up, the silence in the house pressed harder than ever. That night, she heard the creak again. She sat up in bed, listening, every nerve pulled taut. It wasn't just the settling kind of creak. It was slower, heavier, like weight shifting carefully. Her hand hovered over her phone on the nightstand, ready to call 911. Then silence. Minutes passed. Finally, she lay back down, pulling the covers to her chin, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion dragged her under. She began double-checking everything. The front door locked and relocked. The windows tested and sealed. She left her shoes by the door in a perfect line so she'd notice if even one was nudged. She memorized the angle of her coffee table books, the placement of her keys, the exact spot where her phone charger sat on the counter. But the house still betrayed her. One evening she came home to find her shoes reversed, left on the right, right on the left. She dropped her bag instantly, blood pounding in her ears, scanning the room as her breath came in shallow gasps. She whispered, "Hello?" Though her throat was so dry, the word cracked. No answer. She left the house that night and slept at Kara's. She didn't tell her friend the real reason, just mumbled something about needing company. Kara poured wine, put on a movie, and teased her about becoming a paranoid spinster. Emily laughed along, but the laughter tasted bitter. By Monday, she'd had enough. On her lunch break, she bought a small set of indoor security cameras, the kind that linked to her phone, sending motion alerts. She told herself it was just for peace of mind, just to prove she wasn't losing it. That evening, she unboxed them, her hands trembling with nervous energy. She placed one in the living room, one in the hallway, and one on her nightstand, angled toward the bed. The little green light blinked as each one came online. For the first time in weeks, she felt a tiny flicker of control. When she crawled into bed that night, she whispered, "Now we'll see." That was when the house's silence changed. It no longer felt heavy. It felt watchful, as though something inside the walls had noticed the cameras too. Part 2, Fear Setting In. The first night with the cameras, Emily barely slept. Every little creak in the house made her jump. Every rustle outside the window made her heart pound. She kept her phone on the nightstand, refreshing the camera app compulsively, even though she knew nothing would appear. The next morning, she checked the footage, nothing unusual. The living room was empty, the hallway quiet, her bedroom as she had left it. She breathed a little easier and told herself she had imagined everything. But the second night, the notifications began. Her phone buzzed while she was brushing her teeth. She frowned and pulled it from her pocket. Motion detected. Living room, 1:42 a.m. Her stomach dropped. She rushed to the camera feed. The living room was empty. The couch cushions sat in perfect alignment, the coffee table uncluttered, the TV off. She replayed the clip several times. Nothing. Maybe it was a glitch. She forced herself to believe that. The following nights, the alerts became more frequent. Hallway, kitchen, bedroom. Each time, the app recorded movement that didn't seem to exist when she checked in real time. Emily's rational mind fought hard against panic. Maybe the cameras are sensitive. Maybe it's the wind shifting the curtains. Maybe the cat. She didn't have a cat. Once she saw a shadow dart past the living room feed, quick, almost imperceptible. She froze, heart hammering, squinting at the grainy footage. No, there's no one there. But the feeling stayed. That creeping sense that she wasn't alone, that the house she had thought safe had become a stage for someone or something watching. She started noticing small, impossible things. Her laptop was slightly angled when she left it on the kitchen counter. Her coffee cup moved from the windowsill to the table. She began photographing the placement of items around the house, a silent record of her sanity. Every day she compared, every day the items had shifted. Her friends began to notice the strain. Kara noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched at every noise. Emily laughed it off, saying she was stressed at work and avoided staying too long at home alone. But the house seemed to resist her efforts to ignore it. One night she woke to a faint smell in the bedroom. Tobacco. The tang was subtle but unmistakable. Emily never smoked, and she lived alone. She froze in the dark, pulling the covers over her head, willing it away. When she lifted her head, the room smelled faintly empty, clean, but the lingering trace made her stomach twist. She started checking every closet, every nook, every corner. Nothing. Her anxiety became a constant pulse beneath her skin. She stopped taking long showers. She started keeping a small kitchen knife next to her bed. She left lights on in every room she left, as if illumination could chase away the invisible presence. Then came the whispers. It started softly, a breath through the living room at 2 a.m., a scraping sound behind the couch, a voice almost too faint to hear. "Emily?" She jerked upright in bed, listening. Nothing. Her phone's flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. She crept through the apartment. All doors locked, windows shut, every closet empty, every shelf bare. She almost told herself she was hallucinating. Almost. The camera notifications began to arrive at unpredictable hours. She would wake to her phone vibrating wildly on the nightstand. Motion detected in the hallway. Motion detected in the living room. Motion detected in the bedroom. The living room feed one night showed something she would never forget. A shadow moved across the wall, slower than any human should move, and then paused. At the edge of the frame, a figure stood. She couldn't make out the face. Her camera was too grainy, but she could see the outline of a man, tall, thin, hunched slightly forward, and he was looking at her bed. Emily dropped the phone, hands shaking, unable to breathe. The shadow didn't move in the clip's second replay. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was standing, watching silently. The following night, Emily couldn't bear to stay in the house. She grabbed a backpack with a change of clothes, her phone, and a small flashlight. She stayed at Kara's again, trying to laugh off the terror, but every vibration of her phone made her jump. By the third night, Emily stopped leaving her bedroom. She slept fully clothed, flashlight and knife on the nightstand, her phone at arm's length. Motion notifications kept coming. Hallway, kitchen, living room. But when she checked, there was nothing there. She became convinced it was some cruel trick her mind was playing. But the subtle signs persisted. A picture frame slightly tilted, her shoes reversed once more. The faint tang of tobacco in the bedroom air. Emily's work life began to suffer. She was distracted during shifts, startled by sudden noises, constantly checking the time. Her co-workers noticed the strain, but she told them nothing. Who could she tell? That someone had been living in her home without her knowledge. It sounded insane. And yet she had the cameras. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing the footage in daylight. Something about seeing it in bright sunlight made it easier to deny, but her stomach sank as she scrolled through the alerts. Shadows moved where shadows shouldn't. The figure appeared for a second in the kitchen, then in the living room, then disappearing before she could focus. Then she froze. A clip at 3:17 a.m. caught him. She could see the outline clearly this time. The man's face was obscured, but he wore a dark hoodie and pants, and his posture was unnervingly relaxed. He was looking directly at the camera, as if he knew it was there, as if he had been expecting her to watch. Emily gasped, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped the phone. She backed away from the table. The rational part of her screamed to call the police, but another part whispered, "He might still be here. He might be watching you right now." And then her phone buzzed again. Motion detected, bedroom. Emily's heart thumped so loudly she thought the neighbors must hear it. Slowly, deliberately, she approached the camera feed. The clip was grainy but unmistakable. The corner of the bed shifted as if someone knelt behind it. The shape of a man's head appeared briefly. Then, nothing. Emily dropped to the floor, trembling, tears stinging her eyes. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't call someone. What could she say? "There's a man in my house, but I haven't actually seen him yet." She felt the walls closing in, suffocating her with the oppressive certainty that she wasn't alone. That night she made a decision. She would leave the house. Packing quickly, she stuffed a backpack with essentials, her wallet, phone, flashlight, and the knife she kept at the nightstand. She didn't look back as she opened the front door and stepped outside, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She locked the door behind her and ran. For the first time, she didn't hear creaks, she didn't hear whispers, just her own ragged breathing in the darkness. But even as she ran, a thought chilled her to the bone. She hadn't seen him leave. Part 3. The Footage. Emily had never felt fear like this. The house was quiet, almost deceptively so, as she sat on Kara's couch with her phone in her hands, scrolling through the security camera app. She had been too afraid to sleep in her own bed, but now, for the first time, she could look at the footage without feeling like someone was hovering behind her. At least, she thought she could. The first clip she opened showed the living room at 1:42 a.m. The sofa cushions were in perfect alignment, the coffee table untouched. Nothing unusual. She let out a shaky laugh. Just a false alarm. The next clip made her stomach drop. It was from 2:17 a.m. in the bedroom. The video was grainy, the low-light mode making shadows stretch across the walls. And then, there he was. The figure of a man, dark and indistinct, standing near the foot of her bed. Emily froze. She could make out the broad shape of his shoulders, the slope of his head, the way he leaned slightly forward. His hands were at his sides, but his posture was deliberate, predatory, and he was looking straight at the camera. Emily's breath caught. She hit pause and zoomed in, her hands trembling so badly that the phone nearly slipped. The man's eyes were just shadows, black pits in the dim light, but the focus of his gaze was undeniable. He was watching. She pressed play again. Slowly, he took a step toward the bed. She could hear her own heartbeat in the video, the subtle thump of terror in real time, her pulse mirrored in the footage somehow. Then he turned and vanished from view, moving toward the corner of the room, almost as if he were melting into the shadows. Emily backed away from the phone. Her hands shook uncontrollably. No, this isn't real. It can't be real. The next clip made her realize it was 2:35 a.m. bedroom. Motion detected near the closet. She tapped the video and watched. The man appeared again, slowly pacing the foot of the bed, his steps silent. Then he crouched briefly, as if inspecting something, and straightened. His movements were unnervingly casual, as if he had done this countless times before. Emily gagged back a sob. She clutched the flashlight she had kept from the night before, gripping it like a lifeline. She had always thought home was safe. Now, every step, every shadow, every corner of the room felt hostile. The most terrifying part, he didn't care if she was awake or asleep. Then came the last notification. 3:07 a.m. bedroom. Motion detected. Emily opened it with trembling fingers. Her stomach dropped into her toes. The feed showed the bed from above. She swallowed hard, afraid to breathe. And there he was, under the bed. She could see the dark outline of his body, just the head and shoulders, lurking in the space beneath her mattress. He stayed perfectly still, almost as if waiting for something. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. She couldn't look away. She knew he was still in her house. He had been there all along, sneaking through her living space while she slept, watching her routines, learning her habits. Every misplaced cup, every shifted shoe, it had been him. Panic surged through her. Her mind screamed at her to run, but the reality of the man under her bed made her feel paralyzed. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She could only stare at the grainy image of him, silent and waiting. She grabbed her flashlight, throwing the beam under the bed. Nothing. Her legs trembled as she backed toward the door, flashlight trembling in her hands. She knew she couldn't stay. She had to get out. She had to leave this place, now. And then, movement. The man lunged. His hands reached from under the bed, grabbing at her ankle as she screamed. Emily stumbled backward, tripping over the rug and hitting the wall. Adrenaline exploded through her body. She kicked and scrambled, dragging herself toward the door. Every instinct screamed to escape. She fumbled with the lock, nearly dropping her phone, her flashlight bouncing off the walls, illuminating dark shapes that made her stomach churn. Finally, the door clicked open. Emily bolted into the hallway, running as fast as her legs would carry her, heart hammering, lungs burning. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, rapid, determined, the sound of a predator who had been waiting far too long. She threw open the front door, bursting into the cold night air. She slammed it behind her, locking it with shaking hands, and ran to her car, parked on the street. Her fingers fumbled with the keys. She threw the door open and collapsed inside, panting, tears streaming down her face. Once she was in the relative safety of the car, she finally dialed 911. Her voice was trembling, almost incoherent, but she managed to explain, "Please, there's a man in my house. He's been there, living there, watching me." The dispatcher assured her officers were on the way. Emily's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the darkened house. Every window, every shadow felt alive, as if the walls themselves were aware she had called for help. Within minutes, flashing lights painted the street in red and blue. Police officers approached the house, guns drawn. Emily stepped out of the car, waving her arms, voice still shaking. The officers swept the house. In the crawl space beneath the kitchen, they found him, a tall man, thin, with a hoodie pulled over his head, hiding in the shadows. He had been living there, using the attic and crawl space to remain unseen. Food was hidden in corners, bedding arranged carefully, signs that he had been observing Emily for weeks. Emily's stomach turned as she realized the extent of the invasion. Every noise, every small shift in her home had been him. Every stolen moment of peace, every sleepless night. He was arrested without incident, quietly led out in handcuffs, murmuring under his breath, refusing to look at anyone. When Emily finally returned inside with the officers, she felt a hollow victory. The house was technically safe now. The man was gone. But the walls felt different, cold, hostile, watching. One of the officers mentioned, almost casually, "We found evidence he wasn't alone sometimes. Could be someone else was in the house too, hiding." Emily's blood ran cold. She didn't sleep that night, or any night for weeks. Even with the cameras, even with locks, she could feel the presence of eyes, unseen but always there. Some things couldn't be erased. Some horrors didn't leave with the person who caused them. And as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Emily realized the house had changed, and she would never truly be alone in it again. Part 4. The Escape and Aftermath. Emily couldn't stop shaking. Her fingers clutched the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Even in the cold air of her car, she felt sweat prickling at her hairline. The distant wail of a siren, or maybe it was her own heartbeat, made her stomach churn. She watched the flashing red and blue lights reflect across the walls of her house, the same house that had once felt safe and familiar. Now it looked alien, menacing, every window a dark eye staring back at her. When the first officer approached, gun lowered but alert, Emily's voice cracked as she tried to explain. He's been living there, watching me. All this time, I didn't know." Her words trailed off as tears rolled down her cheeks. The officers nodded and reassured her calmly. We'll handle it, ma'am. You did the right thing calling us. We'll check the entire house." Inside, the officers moved with precision. 2 swept the main floor, guns raised. Another climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Emily followed at a safe distance, still gripping her flashlight. Her heart thudded in her chest with every creak of the floorboards. She didn't want to see him. She didn't want to know where he had been hiding. In the crawl space beneath the kitchen, one officer's flashlight landed on a dark figure. Emily froze before the officer's voice broke the silence. "Ma'am, it's him." A tall man, hoodie pulled tight over his head, sat huddled in the shadows. His face was pale and gaunt, eyes darting from the officers to Emily, wide and unblinking. He made no sudden movements, no attempt to flee. There was only a faint, almost imperceptible twitch in his fingers. He was quiet as they handcuffed him and led him out. The officers explained they had found evidence he had been living there. Clothes, bedding, food caches, and notes about Emily's schedule. The realization that he had been inside her house, silently observing her every move for weeks, made her stomach turn. The house felt hollow once he was gone. Emily followed the officers through every room, inspecting corners, closets, and even under the beds herself. Everything looked normal, as if nothing had happened, but she knew better. Every sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the floorboards, reminded her of what had been lurking there. The lead officer spoke gently. "We're going to take him in for questioning. You're safe now, Mom. You did everything right." Emily nodded, but the words didn't reach her. The reality that someone had been inside her home, moving among her things, watching her while she slept, it didn't feel like it could be undone. The following days were the hardest. Emily stayed with Kara, rarely stepping back into her own home. When she did, she triple-checked locks, ran her hands along walls, opened cupboards, inspected under the bed. Her body tense at every shadow, she installed additional cameras, changed the locks, and even considered selling the house, though the idea made her stomach sink. The police provided updates. The man was arrested and charged with breaking and entering, stalking, and unlawful confinement of the home. During questioning, he said little, mostly muttering, avoiding eye contact, refusing to explain why he had chosen her. The investigators described him as organized, meticulous, and patient, someone who had studied her routine with care. Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. Every cup, every shifted shoe, every faint smell in the night, it had all been deliberate. He had been methodical, precise, calculated,